Hey, this is Jono's World, conversation for everybody.
Hello, everyone. This is Jono, and this is episode 7 of Jono's World with Howard Williams, the professor himself, the TikTok professor. I will let him have the honor of introducing himself, though. So the floor is yours.
Hi, Jono, and welcome, everybody. My name's Professor Howard Williams, and I'm on social media, on WordPress, YouTube, and TikTok as Archeodeath. And I'm a professor of archaeology, and I've been teaching and researching the story of past people and our human story for somewhere in the region of 25, 30 years. And I specialise in the early Middle Ages, so often popularly called the Dark Ages of Northwest Europe, Britain and Scandinavia and that kind of field. So all the things that happened after the end of the Western Roman Empire right up to the sort of the Norman period. And but I've been having fun. I talk about the archaeology of death, burial and commemoration too. So anything to do with disposal of the dead and memorialization, really.
So, ancient funerals.
Exactly.
Go dig up the ancient funerals and see what the cultural practices were.
Exactly, because we have some written sources about that, but a lot of our evidence comes from burial sites and cemeteries and tombstones and other kinds of monuments. And of course, we're trying to be very responsible about and only excavate when it's absolutely necessary and we've got clear questions, or these are sites that are going to be destroyed or disturbed anyway. And of course, we have the history of archaeology has a dim, dirty origins in looting and grave robbing, but we are now only doing very careful, rigorous analysis when it's absolutely necessary. But we can learn about so many societies only from the traces of what they leave in the ground, rather than the stories that are written down. So from earliest prehistory right up to our recent times, many of our archaeology reveals the stories of the people who didn't have a voice or didn't have writing and didn't leave their own documents. So I think it's a really important part of our human story to use archaeology to allow us to tell those narratives, those stories about people who otherwise we wouldn't know about.
Yeah, I mean, how much of our human history that we actually wrote down was lost in fires and earthquakes and floods and volcano eruptions and all that kind of stuff. I feel like without archaeology, you would only have a small, looking glass into history. You wouldn't be able to recreate anything.
Well, we're all historians and we're all archaeologists. These terms they're often used as a dividing line between disciplines, but historians rely on archaeological information all the time. Archaeologists work with historical documents all the time. But yeah, I mean, it's just history without the writing, and often we're working with written sources too. So, yeah, and so I try to introduce students. The rhetoric, I don't know if my percentages are exactly accurate, but I say archaeology is the 99% of the human past where we don't have writing, and it's also the 99% of the people who weren't leaving that writing, even in times where there are documents. So, whether it's, so I teach my students bits and pieces from, the earliest evolution of different hominin species, right the way up to looking at the archaeology of abandoned Soviet mining sites in the high Arctic, where there's like one or two, there's the only records that the Soviets leave behind are production targets, but the lives of the people, the abandoned in the 1990s within living memory, and yet archaeological survey can reveal those stories of just to give you a really stark example, so it's not just about the distant past. We can use archaeological survey and excavation to tell us about people as recently as the last decade or two.
Yeah, I mean, even that, and then you're a detective of the ancient world.
Yeah, exactly. It's good fun, and I've done some field.
The Sherlock Holmes of the ancient world.
I've got a pipe. I don't smoke, but I should for the image,
And now on TikTok, you are
Oh,
always
it's
having people come
it's
after
very
you
much
over
a story that we
Viking
can.
DNA.
You've frozen.
So, what
You've
is the
frozen.
latest Iron Age research
No
of the
research.
Viking, Scandinavian, tell us at the moment? Oh, I think we're frozen. Oh, are we back?
Sorry, it looks like my internet just died, so I'm back. Sorry, yes.
Oh, it's okay. I can edit that part out.
Okay.
I was saying on TikTok, you're always finding a little bit of heat with people over Viking DNA. So,
Oh
what
yeah,
is the
yeah.
latest research that's coming out? About the late Iron Age, the Viking period, Scandinavia. What are some of the key historical implications and things that's coming out? And what is this obsession that we are finding ourselves with Viking DNA? I mean, I guess
Yeah.
a starting point would be, what was a Viking?
Okay, yeah. So, I study the early Middle Ages, so the 5th to 11th century CE or AD, depending on the style you'd like to talk about. And the later part of that is often called the Viking Age for Northern
Right.
Europe, and this is the late 8th through to the 11th centuries. And the Vikings are perhaps the only early medieval idea or people or phenomenon many people have heard of. So even though it's not the only thing I study, it's the thing that gets people interested in. So on TikTok, I'm often talking about the Vikings because even though they're best known, there's so much misinformation about who were the Vikings, where were the Vikings, and why were the Vikings. And so I try, as you rightly say, one of the big areas of controversy is DNA analysis, because we've seen multiple revolutions in being able to obviously discover DNA and take the DNA analysis of living people to work out our degrees of affinity with each other and our stories. But now we're able to extract ancient DNA. There's been a revolution in the archaeological study of human populations in the past. We call this archaeogenetics. And so for the Vikings, this is like the Vikings are at the crash point between these two things, between modern DNA and the ancient DNA. Because we live in this, putting it simply, the Vikings weren't a group of people that went around calling themselves Vikings. No one in the early Middle Ages probably called themselves Vikings. And you'll hear some people on TikTok say, Vikings is a job. Well, yes, the word may have originated to refer to people who went on seaborne adventures, expeditions for trading and for raiding. But today we tend to use it as a catch-all term for a host of different, phenomena. And we're talking about basically not even a single culture or ethnic group, but a network of different communities and network of seaborne connections from Scandinavia, the Baltic, and the Russian and Ukrainian river systems to the east, down to the Arab world and Byzantium. In the West, we think of the Viking Ages about the trading networks and the raiding networks, linking Scandinavia to Francia, that's modern Low Countries, Germany and France,
Right.
and to the British Isles, to Ireland and Britain. And in the Viking Age, Scandinavians start to settle the North Atlantic, first the Faroes and Iceland, and then Greenland up into the 13th, 14th centuries. And then very briefly, they get to continental North America. And we've now got some archaeological evidence to back that
up in Canada.
They didn't stay long,
Right.
Yeah, Newfoundland. So you have a phenomenon called the Viking world, the Viking diaspora of Scandinavian peoples. But there was nobody going around, unlike the TV show gives you the idea, saying, I am Viking. Now, the reason why that becomes a problem with the DNA is that when people are saying, look, I've done a DNA test and it says I'm 30% Viking or 10% Scandinavian, or maybe that's because I am a Viking. I've got the blood of the Vikings. I've got I've got a Viking ancestry. I've got Viking heritage. I'm of Viking descent. These are ideas people want to latch onto. because it sounds cool, because the Vikings are a bit of everything to everyone. They're often seen as like proto-democratic. They're seen as early entrepreneurs, early capitalists. They're also seen as super warriors. They're also seen as, bold adventurers and mariners. And they kind of fit into lots of modern fantasies. And obviously everyone's seen the MCU Thor, the mythology.
There's sex symbols too, like in our world.
Exactly. Yeah. They're hyper feminine and hyper masculine, and they're and it has to be said that part of that mix of appeals since the 19th century has been nationalist. Different nations in Europe, and then America latched onto this as well in their, particularly when obviously people of Scandinavian descent, but also because they allowed Americans, as with the Anglo-Saxons, to think of ancestors that were definitely not Mediterranean, definitely not brown or olive-skinned, and could be put on a pedestal as something special. So lots of people have valorized the Vikings and used the Viking label. And it's easy to sort of, I'm reluctant to say it's just about white supremacy, but it is. But it's also about many other things that latch onto that. So, the landers that first went to Mars were called the Viking, because this is about exploration. So I'm not saying that necessarily that people were consciously thinking this is a white supremacist thing to do. Let's call them Viking. That people think about it as a sort of fun, ancient, almost seems mostly harmless as a label, but there's a lot of packaged racial, cultural, nationalistic baggage with it. And so in Denmark, in Britain, in Spain, the Vikings all are part of our different nations and different regions' stories. In Ireland, in Iceland, whether they're Nordic speakers or not, because everyone wants to be a bit of Viking. Everyone wants to latch onto it, even if it's just wearing a fun hat to a football game, American football or soccer. It's a way of sort of connecting into this idea of the wild barbarian, and so when I suppose where the scary thing, the power of this new research of being able to access past DNA is that suddenly we can tell a much richer story about the Viking world, and that's the blessing. But the curse is that people are using this now as a kind of new race science. They're seeing, it's science, it's genetics, therefore my cultural label has legitimacy. And so we're almost seeing a kind of, in popular terms, we're seeing almost like a return to the worst of the 19th century race science. It's like instead of measuring skull shape, we're basically just looking at DNA tests and going, I've got my Viking heritage. And I'm simplifying massively, of course, and people watch.
No, you're generalizing a big problem. You can't go into
exactly. Right. But in crude terms, the challenge we face is that DNA is part of our study of history. It helps us to understand history and ancestry. But on the flip side, it's leading to a host of confusions. And so I've been trying to push back against some of that on TikTok by simply saying that you can't have Viking DNA. It's a meaningless statement. And why is it meaningless? Well, there was no group called Vikings. That refers to a whole host of different peoples. And the other side is that DNA can't show you that, because actually it's so long ago. If you got Viking DNA, it basically means your ancestors came roughly from somewhere in Central or Northern Europe. It doesn't really, and a lot of these ancestry tests are peddling ethnic labels to sell you an identity. They're basically you're buying the test to tell you you're a bit Irish and a bit British. Anyway, so it's just making people aware of history, but also that people are selling you an identity in the same way as if you can buy a T-shirt, and you can buy a whole host of different T-shirts on Amazon or wherever you buy your T-shirts online. Just because you can buy one that suits your identity doesn't necessarily mean that changes who you are. But people are really weighing in on this and saying, it's a kind of what people are calling a geneticized identity now, and it's a bit scary, because this is obviously not just a passive someone sitting at home getting a piece of paper going, oh yeah, that's nice and I'm a 20% Scandinavian and that means I might be descended from a Viking. People are obviously using this as another way to bolster their exclusive identity to the detriment of others.
Yes.
And I think that's the problem, isn't it? Is when not everyone does that, of course, but some people take it all a bit too seriously.
It's being used in that way, and that is a problem.
I think that's the issue. When we see
Yeah.
this is not just an American issue, which is a thing I want to make very clear, because people seem to think, particularly when I have a British accent, that I'm bashing Americans on this score. This is a problem all over the world, actually, with these ancestry tests, and for indigenous communities, it is being used against them. For people of colour, it's being used against them. It's many different layers to it. So it's as much a problem in the UK as it is in, say, Canada or the US. That would be my point.
Yeah. And so for someone who, is just wanting to do their family history, they do the DNA test that shows up all kinds of crazy stuff. But probably the safest bet to make sure that you are connected to a person would be census records, right?
Oh, yeah, of course. And the problem is that these DNA tests are getting better and better at one level, because they're getting better and better at, the bigger the number of people that buy into it, the more they're making comparisons. So, but the challenge is misreading their percentages as evidence of people. It's giving the criticism that's been levelled at them is it's creating a new legitimacy for ethnic groups, as if there were ethnic groups in the past, discrete people called Saxons, Picts,
right,
Irish, Franks, Huns, and so on. And these people literally were sealed, separate, and that we're just a blend of all these peoples. And if you don't look into history in a significant way, it's very easy to be seduced into thinking that nationalities and ethnicities are the same. Many of our nation states in Europe are products of the 18th and 19th centuries. Their people spoke dozens of different languages and cultures right up to very recently. And we're seeing this kind of homogenizing, sort of simplified history. It's the kind of history that people like Elon Musk like, when he recently said, that maybe, what did he come up with, some garbage about how maybe Rome was founded by a bunch of people from the Trojan War. Yeah, I think that kind of, it's like school book. It's not even school book history. It's like preschool history.
No,
but,
it's pre-teen.
If you want that, kind
I
of
call
story,
it Joe Rogan history.
Yeah, Joe Rogan history is probably better than Elon Musk history. Yeah, but it's like that kind of. I don't even want to look at a screen. Someone else tell me what the screen says. Type history. It's like it's so lazy that you can't even. Bother to read a sentence. That's my take. But if you want to actually understand about who you are and you care, then obviously DNA tests are one way to go. But you've got to understand it's a much more complicated phenomenon, and you're not revealing necessarily the truths you think you're revealing. It's a very much more complex picture, because history is complicated.
Yeah, I mean, my entire life I was told that my whole family is from Scotland, but I have German, African, Native, English. I mean, I have the whole gamut, and I'm just like, we really to think that someone is a Viking now, especially after 700-800 years more since they finally stopped. There's no, come on. There's a bit of common sense that's lacking.
There's a really great academic study done in 2021 in the journal New Genetics and Society called this is the title of the academic paper, I Am a Viking! DNA, Popular Culture and the Construction of Geneticized Identity. And these are sociologists, and they did interviews with people. And it was both quite revealing and scary, the kind of, they worked through interviewing a range of people from America and from Scandinavia about when they did their DNA tests, what they felt these DNA tests meant. And it was really interesting, because I think it echoes a lot of the things I see on social media. I've got Viking ancestry. That means my ancestors were all blonde-haired, blue-eyed. They were all red-haired. They were all strong, muscular. The men were literally bristling with male testosterone-ness. They were all vicious warriors. They were all,
throw
explorers.
A spear 100 yards.
They must have been really good at trading, and they should be, and these ideas. Not everyone's taking them directly seriously, but they are playing into stereotypes, and then as this paper,
they're snowballing.
Yeah. So this paper said that, the desire to be Viking is really high. So even if you get a tiny fraction, and they said that the consumers, the people who are buying these ancestry texts, take advantage of the elasticity of the term. And some of them see it as more just, they latch onto stereotypes they've already got from their pop culture, and they match that up. So it's not just that people are buying into uncritically what the term is, the company's telling them. They're using it as a landing stage for a whole series of imaginings and fantasies, which at one level is healthy. I mean, we should all like to imagine about who we were and where we came from, but some of it is quite old-fashioned and unhealthy. Yeah, it's not. Of course, I like to imagine myself. I'm descended from the Flintstones. I imagine that my ancestors had pet dinosaurs and drove little cars. With with stone wheels.
I'm Pictish. I'm 100% Pictish, and no one will ever convince me. No, it is fun to think about, and I think that is part of the good side of these DNA tests. I would have had no idea about some of my African DNA or how much of it that's actually there, Somalia and Congo. Wow. I wouldn't have known those details. Now I have no idea who it came from, but I would have never. And so I'm like, oh, that's kind of fun. Like, wonder who that was all those years ago. It's fun. It is a fun and innocent thing. But when we make it the cornerstone of our identity, where we have a problem.
But if I can flip it around and say, let's talk about some of the positive things that DNA research on ancient bones is telling us. We're in a really exciting time. There was a big study published
very much
in the journal Nature in September 2020 called Population Genomics of the Viking World. And what it did, with the qualifiers, like all of these DNA studies, they're picking out and analysing bones from skeletons excavated by archaeologists across the Viking world. So this is actually ancient DNA, right? Not DNA from modern people making samples. These ancient DNA, it's still a small sample. They've got how many? 400.
And it breaks down. It's incomplete.
Yeah. But they're reconstructing it, and they did it from 442 human burials from Sweden, from Denmark, from Estonia, and it's only the beginnings, but it starts to show a picture, and the picture it shows is exactly at one level what we would expect. Because these were trading, raiding, slaving people who were travelling long distance, it's showing us that not only was the Viking Age a time where Scandinavians started contributing to the DNA of other regions of Europe, but also as a time where Scandinavia started to become more diverse. And indeed, in a follow-up study that by another group of researchers published in Cell in 2023, they were able to show that actually Scandinavia was more genetically diverse in the Viking Age than it is now. Now, when we say genetically diverse, some people mean that it would be like walking down Fifth Avenue in New York City and there'd be people from all... No, it doesn't necessarily mean there are literally some kind of modern TV show.
Same tone, but different genetics.
Yeah. I mean, we're talking about people generally from northern, bit of eastern, bit of western Europe. But the point is, there was no single Viking people speaking one language, all going around going, I am Viking, and having the same hair colour and the same beards. Although there's probably always one of those, and even at the time, probably people were rolling their eyes and going, "Oh God, he's at it again," But my point is, the population was always in flux, and this DNA studies obviously is. One level, it's good to debunk the most lunacy of the extremist supremacists who like to really fantasize about these noble, pure white northerners who were nothing of the kind. But also, it's really important because it's showing that genetic makeup of the Scandinavia was never not. It was always in flux. It was always accepting new people in. It was always pushing new people out. And so this DNA...
Which is the story of the ancient world.
Exactly. And again, as I said, not really a revelation, but it's really important. And it's adding some details. Like some of these genetic studies are showing that some of the people we're finding buried in the same boat graves in Estonia who went on the same Viking raid were brothers. You know, it's giving us little insights into that, you know, and obviously that Viking raid didn't go so well because they all ended up dead in a boat. But my point, you know, the point is, it's giving us a, you know, real insight. And it's also showing us that, giving you another example, some of the burials where people are being buried as Scandinavians with grave goods in boats in Orkney, their DNA is showing that they're basically locals. They're Picts. They're the descendants of the native people that were already there. So to use a crude North American analogy, you know, you're excavating some graves from a colonial cemetery, and this happens all the time when archaeologists have been excavating, and surprise, surprise, it's full of people who have native ancestry, who have, you know, African ancestry, because no, these colonies weren't just full of white people, you know, they weren't full of Northern Europeans. So, you know, it's the same point, is that people obviously are being integrated into these societies from the first generation onwards, and you know, a couple of decades in, you're burying the dead with people who actually, most of their, you know, their identities, they never saw themselves biologically. You know, people weren't defining themselves by biology, but you know, in terms of the burial practice, they've adopted the new ways. They're being integrated into that Scandinavian linguistic cultural world. So, you know, this is why it's so exciting and important. So I don't want to diss, you know, archaeogenetics. There are some serious problems, and we need bigger samples and new research. But it's a really exciting
and it will get better.
It will get better. But what we need to be careful of is making sure that we know the problems and how it's being perceived in pop culture. And you know, there's so much misinformation. Another study that went really crazy a couple of years ago was a study done of the late Viking town of Sigtuna in Sweden. And Sigtuna is a wonderful place to visit today. It's actually, you can still walk down medieval streets. I mean, the buildings are more recent, but the layout of the town goes back to the 11th and 12th century. And you've got the ruined churches that were built by the first Christian converts. You know, it really is like stepping back in time.
Stunning.
And when they've done the excavations of the cemeteries there, and they've looked at the DNA of the population, only about 1/3 of the sample were local. The rest of the people were either from the rest of southern Scandinavia or from the Baltic, from, you know, Slavs. They're coming from Anglo-Saxon England. They're coming from Francia. So yes, you know, again, not a massive revelation. It's a massive trading town linked to a royal. The early Swedish Christian kings had their royal seat right next door. So it's hardly surprising, but, you know, it kind of gives you that evidential base to start with confidence saying, Scandinavia in the Viking Age was really mixed, with people coming from all over the Viking world to trade, settle, intermarry. You know, and obviously some of those people are slaves or start their lives as slaves, but other people are merchants. Other people are, you know, having, you know, diplomatic marriages amongst the elite. So it's across the class spectrum. You're seeing the flow of people, and that's really exciting.
Yeah. So Viking, it was more of a culture than anything.
Yeah. I mean, the way I phrase it, which is a bit complicated, but I try to simplify it, is I say Vikings is like a social, cultural, and economic network. So it's like a spider web of colonies. So it's not like a single people, and it's not like a single culture, because amongst those Vikings in Scandinavia, people would mostly in the Viking Age have defined themselves by kinship and by region they're from. So if you're from the coast of Blekinge, you'd call yourself a person from Blekinge. If you're from Svealand, you'd be one of the Svea. People weren't really seeing themselves as part of Scandinavia. And even when foreign sources are talking about the Scandinavian raiders, they're calling them mainly Northmen or Danes in the west. In the east, they're calling them Rus or later Varangians. But honestly, they don't know who these people are, and they're realizing they're dealing with a real mixed population with different, styles and customs, and we can see that in the archaeological record. Like every part of Scandinavia seems to have slightly different settlement styles and structures of where they built their houses, and slightly different ways in which they use their objects and costume, and very different ways of burying their dead. So you can almost imagine the term Viking would be meaningless to most people in Scandinavia in the Viking Age, other than perhaps to refer to people from elsewhere, raiders or people coming on expeditions. So really, it's a kind of meaningless term at one level, but it's a kind of easy sort of, people know what you mean, roughly. They mean, you're talking about the early Middle Ages, and you're talking about people trading and raiding. So I call it a network of contacts, involving trading, raiding, military conquest sometimes was involved. It was a violent time, and also colonization, because it was a time where people are moving into new territories, and particularly in the North Atlantic.
Yeah.
So that's not an easy answer
that's
at all,
very true.
is it? But it's the point is, I try to say is, don't think of it as just one culture of people.
Right. Well, and even when you deal with the Scots and the Irish, it's not just Celtic people. You have the Gaels, you have the Vikings, you have the Picts. You have the English. You have a descendants of different cultures creating what is Scotland and Ireland and all of these things. And so,
people very upset in my comments recently because I was trying to explain to them that their capital city has a British name. In other words, a Cymric name, a name of what we would now call Welsh, because before the Scots expanded their kingdom south of the Forth Clyde, the area that we became the Lothians, where Edinburgh is, was British speaking. They were speaking very similar dialect to the modern the Welsh language, the Middle Welsh language. So it's very confusing for people, even in the island of Britain. People get very sensitive when you explain to a lot of English people that they're probably not English, that their descendants, when now their DNA is being analysed as well, they're not Germanic, they're actually Celtic or British. Then people go, oh, no, I'm definitely... It's not simple. It was a messy time, and these are before there were nations. Yeah.
Well, and it's not like they weren't neighbors.
No.
Like there's a lot of once Rome was out of the way, it was there was a lot of mingling going on.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And so to think that someone is purely English or purely Celtic or purely German, it's you can claim it as your primary. Like if someone asked me, what nationality or what ethnic group would you? It would be the Celts, of course.
Yeah.
Look at me, but that doesn't mean that I am all that. No. Just like you probably have a whole conglomerate of people as well.
Well, even in my parents' generation and my grandparents, I'm a mixture of Welsh, English, and Scottish. So I haven't even done my ancestry back even further, but I'm sure it's a mess. But that's literally only going back to my parents. So
that would be a fun TikTok, and just pull up your Scottish history and be like, "Hey, I'm one of y'all now."
Yeah, exactly. I shall claim it. I shall
claim it.
I shall go back and waltz in with my posh Southern English accent and go, "I know, I'm claiming it." I'll last about 10 seconds probably before being.
So, where should people start? Say, they don't have money to buy a lot of books. Okay. The economy is in the tank. Where should someone what should they type into Google to find a good source of Vikings? Should they just go to your TikTok?
My TikTok is a good place, but of course TikTok's a bit of a messy world, isn't it? Where it's difficult to search. There's so much garbage on TikTok too. There's garbage on YouTube too. And I think people do struggle to find reliable sources. So I would say that one of the blessings of the internet is there's so much, but it's about trying to work out who's a reliable voice to give you an introduction. And also, there's loads of downloadable academic studies and popular books. And I've been really clear in my TikToks encouraging people, you don't need to get the latest study or you'll literally be out of date. This isn't like astrophysics where every 2 months there's a new study that transforms our understanding of the universe.
Or psychology.
Yeah. You know, you've got some even an old second-hand book for a couple of dollars, you know, like Elsa Roosendaal's book on the Vikings, or, you know, these will still be useful in 20 years. You know, they're not going to be redundant. They're going to be needing updating and so on. I mean, one of the reasons why I've committed to writing a little introduction to Viking archaeology, which is my next book, because there are some great books on the Vikings, but I thought I need to do one that literally tries to sort of set out. I can't cover everything, but I'm going to cover the archaeology. Like, what do we know about Viking ships? What do we know about Viking settlements? What do we know about Viking era material culture? So people just have a basic introduction. But online, I would say many archaeologists don't want to. I mean, historians, there's more, but many archaeologists don't want to do it. But I've tried to at least do a start. For Vikings, probably the best place to go on YouTube is Dr. Jackson Crawford's account, his channel. And Jackson is a US-based expert in Old Norse culture, but he's a linguist, really, and he's a language expert. He's not a historian or an archaeologist, but he's been very good at getting experts on to talk about particular issues. He invited me on, for example, but he's also invited many other really good scholars. So I would say Jackson Crawford's account, and it seems that a lot of Americans and other people don't like him because, of course, his whole persona is very much Wyoming, Colorado landscapes, and people see it as almost a gimmick. And I was shocked to realise people didn't know. Some people I've talked to haven't realised what they've got, what blessing they've got, that they've got a affable, clear academic doing a YouTube channel in a beautiful landscapes of the Rocky Mountains, and they think they're actually obsessed with the fact that he can't be a real expert because he's in the Rocky Mountains. You know, it's like, what do you want him to do? Do you want him to have like a 7-foot-long beard and live in a hut on the side of a fjord in Norway? And then he'll suddenly be authentic, will he, if he talked in a sort of strange Scandinavian accent? No, but that's, I'm just obviously exaggerating. But the point is, he's a great science.
No, but you're right.
And you can, you know, his conversations with other academics go into real detail. So I would start with him, really.
Nice, good. That's what I'm looking for. You know, for to get the information out there is like,
absolutely.
Who can we trust? Because there's so much just garbage. I mean,
and Jackson's very honest about what he doesn't know. And I think, to my shock, I've realised how many people on the internet see that as a weakness. Like, when I don't know answers, I mean, some people ask me questions, I go, oh yeah, I read about that 2 years ago, but I can't remember now. You know, what am I? I'm not superhuman. I can't remember everything. So I have to go and check. Exactly. And if I don't know, I don't know. You know, but the point is, I think we've all just got to be honest about what we know and what we don't know. Or, I've heard that's not a good idea. I saw someone speak at a conference and said that idea is no longer... is old-fashioned. Let me just check up. Oh, no, it's this now. And then I can share that information. So I don't have it all stored up here. Some of my followers go, wow, Howard, you've got so much in your mind. How do you keep... I look at books. I don't just sit here with I don't just scratch my chin and go, let me expound, you know, with my pipe, obviously.
No, pull it.
You know, we need to consult our sources ourselves. And so I think Jackson's really honest about when he doesn't know things, and I try to be the same. I aspire to do the same with my account.
And that's my goal. Is like I am no expert on anything, and so like I want to inquire of experts, and through that I'll gain a ton of knowledge, of course. But you know, I'm working my way to becoming a historian, but I'm not there yet. I'm still back here.
Great videos I've seen of you where you would go, you know, you would say, "Oh, I don't know much about this," but then certainly given the kind of comments you're getting, they needed to hear what you had to say, and you did a good, we all have to tread on other people's territory sometimes just to get the point
It's
across.
true.
Is my point.
Just to get the
really
point
well.
across. Thank you. So in my census records, not my DNA test, John Alexander Keith of how do you say it? Dontar?
Donata? I don't know. Yeah, Donata. Oh, so you're northeast coast Scottish.
Yeah, he is my 9th great grandfather.
No way.
Yeah,
Then you
and
must
then
be heir to the entire estate and must reclaim it.
that's what I'm saying. Can I come back and just be like, hey, get out of my house?
Definitely. It's like that.
Okay,
For
and
all of the
the
Americans
other
here, you
one,
just turn up, just rock up, and just say, I'm here back to claim it, and everyone will just embrace you, and they'll raise you up on a big, chair.
Call me Lord.
And they'll all do their local folk dancing, and
cool. That's what I'm looking for.
it'd be like it'd be like, I don't know what the term is, chief of the clan, whatever it be, that'll be it, and then it'd be like, the films are true, everyone's heir to a massive fortune because obviously everyone in Scotland is super rich, and
super rich.
Yeah, of course, it's cool. The whole world, and everyone wears the the kilts and the tam o'shanters, and they're all there they're playing the bagpipes, of course. You may do there'll probably be some, like in all these, there'll be some kind of weird ethnic test. But can he play the bagpipes? And then you go, I
or
can. Oh my God,
the big
I didn't
horn.
even know.
Or the Celtic war horn.
Yeah.
What's that? Yeah, that thing. Now that
Toss
thing
the
makes
caber.
some noise.
You have to toss the
Yes.
caber over the castle or something. I'm just thinking nonsense now, but you started this. So,
Well, and then the other guy that showed up was one William Drummond, my 14th great grandfather. And so England, Scotland, which house do I choose? I think Williams is in better shape at this point.
I think you can just make it up and pick and choose. I mean, that's what Ancestry allows you. The further you go back, the more you can just pick and choose which bits you wanna put on a pedestal and say that's my ancestry. So,
I'm just gonna walk in and be like, "Hey, guys, this is my inheritance."
Exclusive. If you've got Somalian DNA, you should be over there as well. You should be just going around the
Exactly.
world. Just claiming.
Just go claim it all. But that is the fun part of ancestry is, looking through the census records and looking and seeing who you're connected to. Like, I had no idea that I was connected to these guys, nor does it benefit me in any way except having a fun story and moment, Now, next question. Stones in substance, space, and time.
Oh, that's the title of my introductory chapter to my 2015 book. Yeah.
So give us a bit of this. What are we?
Yeah. So I'll tell you what. So I mean, I've been studying burials a lot, but I've also been studying carved stone monuments. So early medieval societies were using lots of materials, but they were sometimes carving stone monuments, and these are an amazing resource, and they're a way of where we have them surviving. They don't survive everywhere, but when we have them surviving, these early crosses, early tombstones of the Dark Ages, of the early Middle Ages, are a really fabulous insight into the period. So for the Viking era, one of the classic categories in Northern Europe in Northern Britain, that I've been looking at is the hogback stones. And I've just recorded a podcast with the Nordic Mythology podcast all about them. But anyway, so I won't repeat myself.
Nice.
But my point is, hogbacks, I published a paper in that book from 2015 on these hogback stones because they are amazing. And they carve these stones to look like houses, like miniature houses, with bears grasping onto them. So they're really quite scary looking. And I think the idea is about protecting the dead with fearsome beasts. So you've got these kind of fearsome beasts. So archaeologists excavate graves and settlements, but we also study the fragments of stone sculpture that have been used in and banging around churchyards for 1,000 years. And so these can sometimes be the only clues to these being ancient sites. So I suppose what I really like about these monuments, and the most famous ones, are actually just opposite modern Glasgow in the old church at Govan on the bank of the Clyde. There is the biggest Scottish collection of hogbacks. And if you go on to, they've got a TikTok account, they've got a Twitter account, and they do a lot of public engagement with their hogbacks. So these are literally 1,000-year-old tombs, and all of the local people are really, this is the things they can go and see that tell the story of the earliest people. And these were this was in the kingdom of Strathclyde, which is a British kingdom, a Welsh-speaking kingdom on the banks of the River Clyde in before Scotland was Scotland. And so this was, the Vikings were invading at that time. There was Viking influence on the kingdom, and these stones are just like a time capsule for us to tell the stories for local people about their history and heritage.
Yeah, and so the stone carvings, that's something that you look at a lot as archaeologists, because I've seen you post a ton of Pictish symbols and things like that.
Yeah, I mean, so different parts of the British Isles have different surviving traditions, but the Pictish symbol stones are crazy. They are crazy in the sense that they've attracted a lot of crazy interpretations because they are so unusual.
I'll have some scrolling on it.
I mean, they are. I mean, in simple terms, it looks like the most likely interpretation is they're a pictographic writing system, like hieroglyphs, if you see. So each symbol may have represented not a letter but a syllable, and we're guessing that the different images of an eagle or a Pictish beast or a serpent and Zedrod or whatever it may be, or these abstract symbols may be parts of names, and they were either naming clans or they were naming individuals on these stones, and so they may have been grave markers, or at least public memorials to the dead of particular high status individuals. But rather than they're not using Latin, they seem to be using speaking a different language. The Picts seem to have been speaking a kind of Brythonic language, an early Celtic language that's lost to us. We don't know exactly. We can't reconstruct ancient Pictish. They weren't speaking Gaelic.
Right.
That's comes in from Ireland with the Scots. But they're living in northeast Scotland, and they're speaking a different Celtic language, and they're putting up these crazy symbol stones, and so they are amazing. So I've been trying to explain. I have a whole TikTok playlist on Pictish archaeology and explaining who were the Picts and their Pictish symbols. And yeah, it's not exactly my expertise, but people loved it, and so I'm trying to share things that I know about and I teach. And people are really interested in the Picts.
Well, regardless if it's your expertise or not, you're smart enough to, look at a subject and give people a very well thought out, very well spoken answer.
Oh, thank you.
Regardless of it's your expertise or not. And so, why did they call them the Picts?
Well, the Picts
nice.
Are, good question. The Picts are thought to be, it's a bit. The Romans called them Picts, the Pictish, the painted people, and the Picti.
Painted people.
And the standard interpretation of that is that they painted their bodies, right? But then, were they the only people who painted their bodies? And did they actually paint their bodies, or was it just something that the Romans?
Or was it tattoos, or was it?
Yeah, we don't know. So your popular, if you watch your standard TikTok by someone, they'll go, the Picts were all tattooed or they're all body paint. We don't know. We've got their art on metalwork, and we've got their art on stones, which would have been painted, but we don't know whether they actually painted their bodies. But at least it's like an ethnic stereotype. It's like other early medieval ethno stereotypes, including the Langobards, which Isidore of Seville tells us is they're called that because they had long beards, the Langobards, or the Alemanni, which just means the all men. I mean, do we literally think they were all men, or does it just mean like the equivalent of saying the lads, the boys, the hard bastards, the tough guys, something like that. The
heathens.
Yeah. It's like almost like a football team's name or a nickname. And so we can't literally take the Picts. No, I don't think, again, many people were going around, I am a Pict. It's just a term that started in the 3rd century, applied to a confederacy of different northern British tribal groups that by the 6th and 7th century were forming into kingdoms and converted to Christianity, were establishing, had kings and monasteries. But we just, by the late 7th, early 8th century, they were seen by the Venerable Bede as one of the 4 peoples of Britain. The others being the British, the Scots, and the Anglo-Saxons. And so it's like kind of a term, a catch-all term, like a nickname by others of them. And in reality, we think they were a series of separate kingdoms at first, and by the 9th century, they'd consolidated into one kingdom, but then the Scots took them over. And Scotland is formed in the end of the 9th and into the 10th century by the merging of the Scots of Dalriada with the Picts, and then they start to spread southwards and take over the kingdom of Strathclyde and Anglo-Saxon territories. So that by the 12th, 13th century, Scotland emerges from this consolidation of all these other peoples.
Yeah.
So the Picts
they just all kind of...
Yeah. Sorry, go on.
So ultimately, the Picts bred out into the rest of Scotland.
Exactly. So they're one of the peoples that are often called lost or mysteriously disappear, as in and some people have. I mean, there's a number of questions I got on TikTok. It's like, what happened to them? The mystery of the Picts. Did they all No, they didn't get genocided, which is the standard term that people use for anything that they don't understand nowadays. Is everyone was genocided? No, it just means that they were integrated into the societies, and a lot of place names in northeastern Scotland are clearly pre-Gallic. So they are things like a lot of the river names. There's a River Dee. We have a River Dee in Wales as well, but there's a Dee in eastern Scotland because it's a pre-Gallic name, and so a lot of the pit names, Pitcarmick, Pitlochry, this is a Pictish place name. So a lot of the place names survived. The people didn't go anywhere, and likewise in Orkney, when the Norse arrived and started settling in the late 9th century, the Picts weren't all massacred. They were just integrated into society. It's only in later centuries that people said, well, where were the Picts? Oh, maybe they were all killed off. You are the Picts. We are the Picts. We just don't know it. We just, So there's a kind of...
St. Patrick takes a lot of heat for that.
Yeah. We see all manner of modern myths about St. Patrick and Ireland, don't we? And this kind of crazy sort of ideas that, what happened to the people, So there's all sorts of strange modern myths about people's disappearing, but it's really just about people who just don't understand what happens to communities and societies. Is that if someone starts calling you something else and you just slowly change your name over a few generations, everyone's using a different name. And that's the same. That's what happened with the English. The English weren't a people in the 5th, 6th century. The English were a whole group of different tribes and communities, and it's only when people started externally calling them the English started in the late 7th, 8th century, by the 9th, 10th century, then kings started to claim that and say, well, I will be the king of the English then. Well, who do you mean? Well, all the people I rule already and the people I want to rule in the other kingdoms, I'm going to call them all English together, and then we can all share a common identity. We're all English. Oh, are we? Are we all English? I didn't know that. Yes, well, you are now. And it's that process, it's the political rhetoric, isn't it, that links in with the church. And slowly you get these named peoples becoming a reality when they never had been.
Right. No, it never really was, and until we made it that.
Well, all of these ideas of ethnicities are arguments. All of them are unfolding arguments, aren't they? and nationalities are too in the modern world. So what we see this being played out in the modern press all the time. What makes you more American than the next person? Where is it waving a flag? Is it a particular dialect? Is it eating apple pie literally every day or hamburger? And of course it's not those things. And it's almost cringeworthy to think of that if you are in those countries,
right.
but other people see you that way, and you bounce off those ideas between what other people perceive you to be and what you think are the values or the behaviours that matter for you. And some people go, oh, we reject that version, we want this version. And so it goes on, and it's the same with every country.
Yeah, and it's funny, and the American thing is, because you do get that over here. Like you get, my wife is first generation American. And then on some lines, I'm like third or fourth generation. Some lines I'm fifth or sixth. Others, I'm the thousandth generation here, with some of the native. But the idea that one person is more American. There's someone on social media. He's called the over opinionated Brit. I don't know if you're familiar with him or not.
No, I haven't followed.
But he's in America. He's kind of a political TikTok guy, but he's a citizen, and I would consider him even though he has the English accent, he's an American. I've had family in every war in American history. Actually, my grandpas fought each other in the Revolutionary War. One fought for the English, one fought for the Americans.
It's really
and
eerie.
So,
yeah.
You
have it's amazing how in family terms, it seems a long time ago, but people do remember who fought on what side. And I was talking to a historian who was taking the English Civil War of the 17th century very personally, and he was explaining how his great-great-great-great-great-grandfather was like of course he was a very posh guy, and he had aristocratic family on both sides, and it was not about, no one's descended from poor people, of course, everyone's descended from someone posh. So he was descended from some like earl on one side and some duke, and some, and it was like, it was very serious for him. It was very serious about religion and politics and identity. And for me, I've never really had that sense, but it really matters, doesn't it? Going back 300-400 years, yeah.
It does, and people will claim that here. I'm American because I've had family in every war. I'm American because they really. It's so gross. It's a way of creating separation between the people who have been here for one generation and people who have been here from the start. It's just it's a way of creating a little bit more elitism.
Yeah, and I think we just got to be. The more we learn about history, the more we can debunk these kind of rhetorics and see them for what they are, and sort of. But people are easily drawn into them, aren't they? Easily seduced into these very simple narratives of, who we are and where we came from. But I think
they black and white it.
It's not. We shouldn't reject it. We shouldn't just say we shouldn't study history. We shouldn't study any of it.
No,
it's about understanding and who we are and where we came from, and having a richer, so the next generation have a better foundation. And when we started off talking about DNA, whether it's talking about family history, whether it's talking about the story of nations or the story of regions, it's not about rejecting all of that. It's just being aware of the different forces at work to prioritise some histories over others. And I think that's what we're all trying to make people aware of.
And also, every company has a bottom line, and Viking DNA sells.
It does. I don't even.
It sells.
I've never tested myself, but I'm quite certain I'm 110% Viking.
I'm a redhead. I am.
Yeah, absolutely.
That.
It's like,
must be. Or Alexander Keith's, his castle is directly across the loch from a Pictish camp.
There's no doubt.
He just rolled his boat over and.
The way it was.
Yeah, I'm all of them. But we
on the
actually
conversation.
probably all are a little bit. Yeah.
I mean, I must admit, when I was a younger bloke, I remember the first time where I felt very conscious of being British, and it was when I was interrailing around Europe, and I spent a day going around some sites with this Australian gal around in Oslo, actually. And I remember saying goodbye to her, and she'd met up with some Americans and some New Zealanders and some other English-speaking, international travellers. And I was walking away, and I heard her go, "Yeah, he was actually quite nice, even, despite being British." All day I've been having a nice chat with this lady, and I thought, it's like, are we that bad? Oh, okay. But it's the point is, we all have our national stories and reputations to apologise for, depending on where we are and how we are. Yeah.
Well, when I went to England and I have an Appalachian accent, everyone over there thought I was from Texas.
Yeah, I think people
they just assumed
limited understanding of American accents. Yeah, okay, I'm sorry about that.
Yeah. They're like, "Oh, he's a cowboy. Listen to him talk." And I'm like, "Nope, I'm from the mountains." Totally different part of. I mean, you were closer to Ireland than I am to Texas.
Yeah. But we do see that even in Britain, where the sort of predominant Southern accents of which I possess, do people with the Southern accent, Southern English accent, tend to see that as the standard, and everyone else has an accent and we don't, and it's really funny. But I must admit, when I first moved to Chester 15 years ago, I did struggle with some of the Scouse accents, because I'd have students who would speak very fast with the sorry. But no, I'm quite good at it now. But Irish Scottish.
Well, Americans have that same problem. Yeah, Americans have that same problem. Like if you take someone from California and drop them off in Eastern Kentucky, they're going to have a very hard time understanding the dialect because it is vastly, vastly different.
Well, to my ear, like people from Essex sound Australian to me, because they sound really sort of like it's really funny, But I go, oh my god! Sometimes I love it because I obviously live in northwest Wales, so I have lots of people speaking Welsh accents around me and Welsh language, but also when I go back south, it's really nice to be back in a town. Oh, look, Southerners! I go, hang on, that's like me. But it's like, look at him talk like that weirdo, and I went, oh yeah, but that's just the way I sound all the time.
That's the way I sound too here. It's funny, and I noticed that just from the different English people I follow over there, there is accents that I'm like, ooh, what did he just say? Because like it's kind of blending together, and then like people like you, I don't have a hard time at all understanding.
I was very lucky.
But there is.
My mum grew up from West London, and she was a telephonist, and she encouraged me. Even though I sort of grew up in a working class family, she encouraged me to speak very clearly because she knew the importance of speaking clearly. I didn't face the pressure of some people had of like trying to force a change in my accent, but I did at least learn to speak clearly. Even because I had people in my year at school who had very London accents, Berkshire accents. Berkshire accents are very different. It sounds to many people sounds a bit like yokel, sort of West Country accent, but it's not. It's a very distinctive kind of accent, and I hate to have people like that. And then obviously I had kids in my class with sort of South Asian accents, and different ethnic backgrounds.
University.
My point is, at least she encouraged me to speak really clearly, and I try my best to sort of do that. But I've tried not to become too posh, but I do revert back more, depending on who I'm talking to a more sort of regional accent. But I don't. I change all the time. Like we all get influenced by different people we're talking to, and I sort of.
When I go back home. Yeah. Whenever I go back home, my accent it kicks up. When I'm out in a city, my accent, and almost like code switching, like where Yeah, it's a very similar thing. I will like the Irish, the northern Irish accent is the hardest for me to understand. Even
Yes,
though that's where it's very hard for me to understand.
I know exactly what you mean. Although I actually never, I've had a couple of problems in my life with that, and sometimes where you just go. I remember one time when I was in the Scottish borders, which is, and I went to a bar and I suddenly realised that that was the only place I remember thinking my accent was making a problem for me, and I was going to, and my friend said, "How did you get on at the bar?" And I went, I don't think they liked serving me, but I got drinks out of it. Obviously, you know, yeah, we sent you on purpose to see if you'd survive, you know, and it was just like, you know. Sort of the cruel test. Let's send
funny.
the Englishman to the bar and see if he can get drinks and see if he gets punched. You know.
Yeah,
Most
well,
places are friendly.
when I was in London, yeah, they are. When I was in London, I got called ginger more than any other time in my life. To the point where it was like, all right, if one more person calls me a ginger,
To
I'm
your
gonna
face,
go.
almost like just like,
Oh yeah,
you're ginger.
no, just what American ginger, you know, like I'm like, guys, just
It's not that
because I'm
revolutionary.
American doesn't mean I don't know what y'all meant by that back then.
I can only apologise to my London compatriots.
Oh, but I absolutely loved London. My favorite place was Shaftesbury. King
Oh,
Alfred the Great's tomb. They have, they have that abbey
oh
there.
yeah.
It's like the last stronghold of England against Rome in the 800s or something.
Yeah.
But it was a great look. It was my favorite. They have Golden Hill that is just stunning.
Beautiful, beautiful.
And of course, I went to Stonehenge.
Yeah. Good old Stonehenge. Haven't been there
Get
for a
a,
couple of
I
years.
didn't pay to go in. I just went to the gate and took a picture.
That's enough. That's all you need.
Yeah, that's enough.
I
What,
went
what else
the
am I going to
first time
see?
a couple of years ago. I did go to take an early booking and go. I went inside the stones because you can book to go in and pay extra, and I did that. But I've done it once now.
So as we are, we've hit our hour. I know it's getting late there.
Yeah.
Um, and we just brought up Stonehenge. What is Stonehenge?
Okay. Stonehenge is a long-running ceremonial complex from the late Neolithic and early Bronze Age. So it may have been. It's a kind of focus of seasonal ceremonies for Neolithic farmers, and then they just. I mean, basically, it's not one monument because they rebuilt it about four times, at least three times, using different stones.
Oh wow!
And then after it was abandoned in the early Bronze Age, it stayed in the landscape for thousands of years, and stories and myths and legends have accrued around it. So we've even got burials from Stonehenge in the Anglo-Saxon period, my period, which looked like
Oh, wow.
they used it as an execution site, and that it was seen as a cursed place where you took people to knock their heads off. Indeed, the name Stonehenge may come from the Anglo-Saxon term, the stone henga, the stone hanging place, meaning a two-post gallows with a cross beam from which you hanged people. So the idea, the Stonehenge name refers possibly, this is the guess, to, in the Anglo-Saxon period, 2,500 years after it was built, people thought this was a place where criminals were executed, and so they used it that way. So Stonehenge
Wow.
was, is a 5,000-year-old monument, but it's had many phases of use and reuse. The Romans may have gone there and chipped stone off and thought it was a magical place where they chipped bits of stone off. They found lots of chippings associated with Roman pottery, so they may have used it as a sort of place of ancient ritual practice. So, yeah, Stonehenge keeps changing. It keeps meaning different things. Now
Keeps
it's a
changing.
heritage tourism destination, but it's been many
Yeah.
different things through its history.
Now, there's not more than one Stonehenge, but they found other sites like that in Scotland
Oh, yeah.
and other places.
It's one. The henge now is a monument type, circular monument type of a bank and ditch, and sometimes with stone uprights. The trillathon arrangement at Stonehenge is unique in stone, but we've got evidence of timber versions of that. So yeah, it was probably just one of many hundreds of circular spaces used for ceremony and ritual in the late Neolithic, early Bronze Age, sort of early farming communities.
Nice. Very nice. Well, I will wrap it up here. We've covered Viking. I think we've covered enough to make a lot of clips that will get us a lot of feedback.
I hope so.
With the DNA stuff. So, but yeah, I'll clip some of this down and we'll post it on social media, and then tomorrow it will be up on Spotify. But I will link you on your TikTok. I'll link your YouTube and your Instagram down in the comments. If you're watching on Spotify, it'd be in the comments. If you're watching on YouTube, come to Spotify and then click on it, because you can't link this stuff. But thank you for coming on. Give us a second to upload, and thank you guys for watching episode 7 with Howard Williams. I hope you guys enjoyed it. I hope you guys learned something. I hope some stuff was demystified for you and made more simple. And we will catch you on episode 8. Thank you guys.
Hey, this is Jono's World, conversation for everybody.